Okay, just a quick disclaimer on this. So this video is intended for real estate professionals only, and anything we cover here should not supersede actual agency guidelines, Fannie, Freddie, FHA, VA. Please refer to those guys or contact me for more in-depth information. Okay, thanks. Okay, one common problem in the lending industry that we run into is the accessory dwelling unit, the ADU, or the mother-in-law unit. This is a type of property that often creates problems because there's a very fuzzy line between the definition of a single family plus an accessory or a two-unit property. And unfortunately, Fannie Mae doesn't make the job any easier because even their guidelines are rather vague. Fannie Mae defines an ADU as follows. An ADU is typically an additional living area independent of the primary dwelling unit that may have been added to, created within, or detached from a primary one-unit dwelling. The ADU must provide living, sleeping, cooking, and bathroom facilities and be on the same parcel as the primary one-unit dwelling. Now, the key word in that whole paragraph is typically. So even Fannie Mae says typically this is the rule on things, which makes things much harder than it needs to be. The issue that you're going to run into is that borrowers, agents, sellers, most of the time don't even know what the true definition of the property that they're trying to market and sell is. So it's really important that you have the tools to be able to find out the information you're going to need to make the determination whether it's something is a single family or whether it's two units. This can affect, the ability to use rental income, the pricing on the loan, the LTV on the loan. So it's really important that you wrap your head around the how-to on this so that you can, make this process smoother for everybody. Okay, so how do you determine whether a property is in fact a single family with an accessory or a two unit? So there's no real perfect guideline here, but there are the questions you can ask that are really important. So the first one is zoning, and this is the one that's going to determine with the most likelihood your final answer. And that is simply, is it single family zone or is it multifamily? If it is in fact multifamily zoned, you almost invariably are going to have to consider that a two-unit property, simply because the specific use of that zoning is for multifamily housing. So if you have two residences on it, it's almost always going to be called by the underwriter a two-unit property. However, just like Fannie Mae's earlier use of typically, there's more to the story and you'll want to find out more information. And the second one is, does the property have a separate address? Most of the time, a single-family residence is going to have an accessory dwelling with either no separate address, or it might be a B, a Unit B address type situation, 2825A, 2825B. Those will both point to the fact that it's a mother-in-law or an ADU. However, if it gets a separate listed address from the post office, it might in fact be two units. Now, the other wrinkle to that, of course, is that safety agencies, fire departments, and that sort of thing are more inclined to push for separate addresses, even on accessory dwellings, simply because it makes emergency response easier for them to know exactly where they need to go. So sometimes you'll see a separate address added, even if it is in fact an accessory. So this is not an ironclad determinant, but it's certainly part of the decision making. Another one, obviously, is the existence of a separate meter. So if you get an accessory dwelling in most counties, states, municipalities, they will say that you have to operate under the main meter. So one electric meter, one gas meter. However, if PG&E goes out there and sets a second meter up, that's oftentimes an indication that is in fact a two-unit property because you can bill it independently. And then the last one is, and this one's the most dubious and non-valuable, but still plays in the game and sometimes will be cited by underwriters for reasons for something to not be an accessory. And that is the property generally inferior to the main home? And I had a property, I don't know, a few years ago in a rural area where I had two identical homes side by side. One was a single family, one was an accessory dwelling, and it met every other criteria. It was zone single family, it had one meter, it had one address, but they were two identical homes. And in that particular case, I had an underwriter that was unwilling to let me call it an accessory dwelling simply because it was not inferior to the other home. So really, these four questions are super important that you can answer right away, and then you reach out to the lender that you're planning to go to and just inquire further. And then also you can reach out to the city or the county, get more guidance from them. And then what I recommend you do is get any of the supporting documentation you've got and present that to the appraiser at the time of the appraisal order, so that your appraiser goes in with, eyes wide open on exactly what they're dealing with, especially if you're trying to push it in one direction or another. If you need rents to qualify, you're going to want 2 units. If you want the lower pricing, you're going to want ADU. So you make sure you get the answers to these questions, and then make sure to lead that appraiser to water. Okay? Okay, so what are the implications of this determination that you've made through all this research and working with the appraiser and figuring everything out? So essentially, in a nutshell, an accessory dwelling unit, a single family plus an accessory dwelling unit, gets the benefit of being considered a 1 unit for LTV purposes, which is almost always higher LTV. Number 2, there's no pricing hit for a second unit. Almost all programs will have some kind of additional pricing hit for 2 units. And thirdly, as an accessory dwelling, you will not be able to count rent on that accessory dwelling. Almost every city that actually has a mother-in-law unit type guidance, they will actually say specifically you are not allowed to rent that property out. Now, with California law changing the way it has, I don't know if they're still going to hold on to that. But from a lending perspective, we still say that accessory dwellings do not get to be rented out and the rent used to qualify. So there's your big negative there. Now, the 2 unit side is just the opposite that we talked about. So you're going to have an LTV restriction, you're going to have a pricing hit, but you are going to be able to use rents to qualify. So as you can see, if you go into this transaction looking at it like, oh, single family plus accessory, and then all of a sudden it's 2 units, you're going to end up with an LTV reduction that can blow your file up. Or if you thought it was 2 units going in and you find out after the fact it's an accessory dwelling, now you can't use rents to qualify and your deal may die. So these are the reasons that I really encourage you to do the research up front, to ask those 4 critical questions right away. And the answers to those will give you a real strong position on knowing where you need to go. Okay, here's a real world example of a crazy property that I did recently where you had conflicting information of those 4 questions and how it was finally decided. So in this particular example, you have a gentleman that bought a 2-bedroom, 1-bath home. It was a little small home here in Chico, and it's the far left structure that you can see in this satellite image. And he built that, and then later on he decided to build an accessory dwelling in the back, and it's actually a significantly larger home. If you look, it's the big home in the lower right-hand corner there. He built a couple nice shops too, but that main home in the back is 2,200 square feet, and the front one was a little 2-bedroom, 1-bath. So in this particular case, we went to the county, and the county came back and said it's R1 zoning definitively. So he had 1 meter, it was R1 zoning, it had 1 address, but it was not generally inferior to the house in the front. And because of the fact that we had the 3 other aspects pretty nailed down, including the R1 zoning, which we've talked about as the primary driver of the decision, this was treated as a single family plus an accessory. So don't just let one answer to the question give you everything you need. You need to chase down all 4 of those answers, because they're going to be part of the final decision. Okay, just a few quick closing points on this whole thing. This particular issue, the accessory dwelling versus the 2 unit, is a situation I think we're going to see increase significantly, especially in the state of California, due to the fact that California state law has basically green-lighted any building of accessory dwellings on the back of any property as an administrative action versus something that had to be approved. So the cities can no longer tell you you can't do that, you simply can. So I think we're going to see it more and more. So really having a firm grasp of how this works is really going to help you navigate the future. All right, well, thank you so much. Appreciate your time. Appreciate the opportunity to share some of my thoughts with you about accessory dwellings, and hopefully it'll make transactions smoother for you going forward. And as always, please feel free to give me a call with any questions or comments. Jim Ketchum here, PRMG. Thanks.